When you're thinking of booking an Alaskan cruise, you're probably expecting two things: whales and glaciers. And if everything goes as planned, Alaska will definitely deliver on both. But I don't think that Alaska is the type of trip where you want to book something cheap and hope that it all works out later. Alaska is the kind of trip where planning ahead really makes a difference. Now, I've been cruising since I was a kid. In fact, one of the first cruises I took as a teenager was to Alaska. Here's a picture of awkward teenager Brad before the beard. Now, I've been to Alaska multiple times and I'll go back there multiple times. So I thought I would put together a list of 10 things that I think any cruiser going to Alaska should consider before booking their trip. These are things beyond just packing. It's things about the itinerary, the ship, the location, the excursions, everything you need to think about to make sure you have the best Alaska cruise possible. And there's one of these items towards the end of the video that I think is really important and a lot of new cruisers get wrong, and it could cost you the best day of the entire trip. If you're new to the channel, I'm Brad. My goal is to help you get the most out of your vacation with honest trip reviews, guides, and real-world tips. If you'd like more videos like this, hit subscribe so you don't miss out on the next one. Let's dive right in. First thing I would tell anyone who's about to book an Alaska cruise is don't start with the ship, start with the itinerary. On a Caribbean cruise, the ship can be the destination and that can be an amazing trip. But Alaska is different. In Alaska, the destination is the point. You're booking scenery, wildlife, glacier viewing, and time in port. So before you get too caught up in which ship has the newest features, look at where the ship is actually going. Does it include things like Glacier Bay? Are you going to the most popular places like Juneau, Skagway, or Ketchikan? Two cruises can both say Alaska on the website, but can be very different experiences. Leaving from Seattle may save you some money. Leaving from Vancouver can get you more time in Alaska. So when I'm looking into an Alaska cruise, the first thing I look at is where is the ship going? How long will it be there? And what kind of experience is this itinerary built around? And that's going to lead me directly into my second tip, which is Alaska is not just the Caribbean with colder weather. This one might sound obvious, but it changes the whole vacation. You're not really chasing a beach day, you're chasing a moment. Things like a whale watching, glaciers in the distance, a foggy morning through the Inside Passage, and that means the way you experience the ship is also going to be different. You may not spend much time by the pool, especially if the weather isn't cooperating. You might spend more time in an observation lounge, on your balcony, walking the promenade, or sitting by a window with coffee just watching the scenery change. That's why I think the best Alaska trip is not going to be on the flashiest ship. I'll share an example, and this is something that I really appreciated on my recent trip on Koningsdam. It's not the loudest ship I've sailed, and it's not packed with thrill features. But for Alaska, that calmer feel made sense. The indoor solarium gave us a spot to enjoy the pool without worrying about the cold. And the small touches like soup on the day we sailed through Glacier Bay made for extra memories. On to number 3, that is to know what exactly you're paying for. When it comes to Alaska, the cruise fare is not the only cost for your trip, and Alaska is more popular than ever. So I would not expect things like cabins or itineraries to remain a reasonable cost. With some trips like a weekend getaway to the Bahamas, you can book the cruise, keep things simple, and still feel like you had a full experience. Now Alaska can be different because I think a lot of the things that people dream about Alaska are going to be tied to excursions that take place away from the ship. Whale watching, glacier visits, scenic railways, helicopter tours. Some of those are going to be incredible, but they can be very expensive. So before you book the cruise, I would price out the experiences you actually want. Think about the ones that really matter to you. Check the pricing before you go. If you want to keep your costs low, that's totally fine, but make sure you're keeping that in mind as you're going into booking your trip. I don't want you surprised later when the trip that you dreamt about is way more expensive than just the cruise fare alone. And I think that's where Alaska can really sneak up on you if you're not prepared. And speaking of being prepared, my next tip is all about preparation. And this may not only apply to Alaska, make sure you're not flying in on the same day as your embarkation day. Don't fly into Vancouver or Seattle the morning of your cruise if you can avoid it. I think this is a tip people roll their eyes at right until a delayed flight makes them watch the ship leave without them. We flew into Vancouver a day early for our Koningsdam sailing, and I'm very glad we did. It gave us a buffer in case something went wrong. but it also meant we could start the cruise feeling relaxed instead of stressed. And Vancouver is worth the extra time if your cruise leaves from there. We had some extra time to experience Canada Place and the harbor and really settle in before the trip began. So yes, it can add the cost of an extra hotel night, but you're already spending all that money on a cruise, flights, excursions, and everything else that goes with it, so this extra buffer gives you a little bit of a safety net. That cost of the hotel room can make sure you save yourself from a very expensive problem. Number 5, once you've decided which excursions are really important to you, don't wait until you're on the ship to book them. Many Alaskan excursions are very popular and will likely sell out before embarkation day. The White Pass Railway out of Skagway is a good example. Whale watching tours in Juneau can also be very popular. And same with certain glacier or wildlife experiences. This doesn't mean you need to overplan every minute. In fact, I think the part of what makes Alaska special is leaving a little room to wander around the towns. But if there's one thing you would be genuinely disappointed to miss, book it ahead of time. And to save a little bit of money, you can book your excursions through a third-party vendor like Viator. I've put together a list of my favorite Alaska excursions, and I'll link it here and in the description down below. And as you're thinking about excursions, my next tip is leave some room for the towns, not just the tours. And that means taking a look at how long you're actually in port. On our Holland America sailing, we had enough time in Juneau to do a full excursion with glaciers, waterfalls, and whale watching, and still come back into town for a little exploring. That gave us time to grab fish and chips at Deckhand Dave's, one of my all-time favorite places, get in a stop at Jellyfish Donuts, and still didn't feel like we were sprinting back to the ship. Alaska's port towns have character. So when you're comparing cruises, don't just check the box that it stops in Juneau or that it stops in Skagway. Make sure you're considering how long am I actually there. A shorter port time can technically check that box, but it may not give you the experience you were imagining. And that time buffer really matters, especially if Alaska throws you a curveball, which leads me to my tip number 7, have a backup plan, because Alaska weather is going to do what it wants to do. This one comes directly from what happened to us in Ketchikan. Our original excursion was supposed to be an e-bike rainforest tour. That sounded very Alaska in the way I had pictured it. And then it was canceled because of the weather. So we pivoted and figured if it's going to be wet and muddy, let's lean into it, and we tried an ATV mud adventure instead. That was not the quiet, peaceful excursion we had planned. It was definitely louder, messier, and a lot more chaotic. But it ended up being a good time. That's kind of the Alaska lesson. You can plan the perfect trip, but you can't control the weather. So before you sail, have a rough backup idea for each port. Maybe it's another excursion, maybe it's a museum, maybe it's a food stop. Maybe it's just walking around town and enjoying a slower day. You don't need to plan 3 vacations at once, but make sure you have some alternatives in case something goes wrong or your plans get canceled. You don't want to be standing on the dock frustrated because something changed. Tip number 8, be thoughtful when you're packing for Alaska. Now, everybody always says to bring layers when you're packing for Alaska. Now, to illustrate that a little bit, when I first came to Alaska all those years ago, I neglected to bring anything warm to wear. So in every photo, I'm wearing the same NCL green sweatshirt from the gift shop. So learn from my mistake and make sure you're bringing warm layers and be prepared. But that advice is almost vague enough to really not be super helpful. What I would say instead is pack in layers, but also pack for wet. You want a waterproof outer layer you can actually trust in the rain. Under that, bring something warm like a fleece or an insulating mid-layer. And for active excursion days, I'd avoid cotton. Cotton holds moisture, stays colder, and if you get wet on a boat or near a glacier, or just walking around in the rain, it can make the day a lot less comfortable. And then you're in Alaska wet, grouchy, and miserable. And keep your phone or camera easy to reach. Alaska wildlife does not wait for you to unzip your backpack, find the right pocket, clean the lens, and then start recording. Now, once you're packed for Alaska, the next big question is going to be, where are you going to be on the ship to see all of that scenery? And that is my tip number 9. Really think seriously about booking a balcony cabin. On some cruises, I'm very open to saving money on the cabin. Alaska is where I'd think a lot harder about the balcony. Glacier Bay is basically a full scenic cruising day, and having your own place to step outside, take photos, drink coffee, and just sit quietly while Alaska goes by is the real advantage without having to fight for deck space. That said, I don't think everyone needs to stretch their budget beyond reason. If the balcony makes the trip too expensive, look closely at the public viewing spaces on the ship. On Koningsdam, for example, the Crow's Nest was one of the best indoor spots for Alaska viewing. It's got big windows, comfortable seating, and great views. But be prepared for crowds. And on other ships like NCL's Bliss, you'll have great views from the observation lounge and the waterfront. So I'm not saying you have to book the most expensive cabin. My advice is cabin choice matters more in Alaska than it does on a lot of warm weather cruises. Think about where you're going to watch the scenery because this is a huge part of the trip. So once you've made those big decisions around the itinerary, the types of excursions you want to do, and the type of ship you want to go on, the next big thing and my final tip is make sure you're taking a look at when exactly you're going to go sailing. Alaska's cruise season is pretty short, but May, July, and September can feel like very different trips. If you're trying to save money, May or September can be worth it. Those shoulder season dates may come in cheaper, but you have to be okay with cooler weather and more unpredictable conditions. If you want the longest days and probably the safest bet for warmer weather, June and July are usually going to be more appealing. The trade-off is that those sailings can be quite a bit more expensive and the ports are going to be a lot busier. And then there's the scenery side of it. Early in the season, you might still see more snow up in the mountains, but later in the season, things can feel a bit moodier and more fall-like. But no matter when you go, Alaska can always still be gray, rainy, and chilly. So I wouldn't pick the date only because it's the cheapest or only because someone online said 1 month is the best. I'd pick the month based on what matters most to you between price, daylight, crowds, weather, and scenery. Now, Alaska is one of the best cruise destinations I have ever been to, and I will go back there time and time again. But I do think that Alaska rewards planning more than other cruise destinations. Pick the itinerary carefully, check the port times, budget for the excursions that matter, think about where you'll watch the scenery, give yourself a buffer before the cruise, and don't go in expecting the Caribbean with mountains. For us, Koningsdam worked really well for Alaska. It was calmer, more comfortable, and better suited to the kind of trip where the best moments might happen outside the window or from a balcony or on a whale-watching boat in the rain. If you want to see the full 7-night trip, including Juneau, Skagway, Glacier Bay, Ketchikan, the excursions, the food, and what we actually paid, I'll link the video here, and I'll see you over there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on board again soon.